Hi, this is George Fludas, and I'm very thrilled to be talking with David Ward on Musicians on the Record. Let's do this.
Hi, welcome to Musicians on the Record. I'm David Ward. This is the show where we bring you the musician's story, and I am super psyched. On the show today, jazz drummer extraordinaire and the channel on YouTube called Bandology, an amazing drummer. George Fludas is on the show. Welcome, George.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Great to meet you.
I'm really glad. And I learned of you on the YouTube channel Bandology, but as I've been following you, I've been realizing, man, this guy is an amazing jazz drummer, first and foremost. We'll talk about Bandology in a little bit, but let's start with just how you got to play drums. When did you fall in love with drums in the first place?
Oh, that's a long time ago. I was pretty young. My father was a very avid jazz fan and sort of a budding young jazz drummer in the 50s. So he was really into jazz music, and so from as early as I can remember, I heard jazz in the house. And he actually he sold his drums way back before I was born.
Oh no!
And he kind of gave up on the dream to be a musician. But he never lost his love of the music and of drumming in particular. So when I was about 5 years old, he ended up ordering up a new Gretsch bebop kit from Frank's Drum Shop here in Chicago. Wow. And that's really when I started to get hooked. You know, I was a little kid, but to me it was just almost like another toy in the house. It was something fun to do for a while, and then I'd move on to something else. You know, and I didn't have any real formal training other than the lessons that he would give me.
So he would give you lessons. What were some of those first things that you learned, and who were you listening to together at that time with your dad?
Yeah, it was everything that he was into, like Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, Max Roach and Clifford Brown. I mean, any great drumming on any great jazz record, you know, we were listening to it, and I was really attracted to it, and so I kind of wanted to figure out how to do what I was hearing. So he would give me little pointers and show me, you know, how to play the ride cymbal and how to keep time and basics of comping, basic rudiments, and that kind of thing. A lot of piano trio records like Bud Powell and Ahmad Jamal, Red Garland. So a lot of it was, you know, early on. Once I got the basics together, he would play a record and he'd say, play along with this. So I'd sit down and I'd try to play along with it. And he'd say, no, you're dragging. You know, the hi-hat's not in the right place. Or don't crash the cymbal too loud. Or don't hit rim shots all the time. You know. So I was little. I was like 7, 8 years old. Yeah. And, of course, at that age, it was something that I was doing just for fun. But it wasn't like I was thinking about, you know, I want to be a drummer, per se.
You know, the music dream is an amazing one. It's a tough one as well to turn into a reality. And you know, it sounds like your dad had that dream, but he also had the real life of raising a family. And what did he do for his day job that supported the family? Well,
he worked for the local, the Cook County department that handles marriage licenses. It's called Vital Statistics.
Yeah.
And so it was like a straight up government, you know, type day job. And like I said, even though he got that drum set and started to play a little bit himself, it was just really like a hobby for him. Yeah. And he didn't even get together with other musicians and jam. You know, as far as like my interest in drumming developing through that time, I didn't have any inclination toward like joining any groups or being part of like any kind of music programs or anything like that until I got to high school. And my high school had a music program, and that's what I ended up doing. Getting into actually you could major in music at my high school, Lane Tech, here in Chicago, which was pretty unusual. So I became a music major in high school, and that's when I really started to, you know, feel like I wanted to make this my future.
Amazing. And so really steeped in the language of jazz from a young kid. What was the dream that was starting to develop, George, as you're going through high school, and what did you want to do with music?
Well, I'll tell you, this is sort of where the Bonham connection comes in. And the reason for that is like I said, I wasn't really part of any music school. I didn't do any music camps, or I never really had an opportunity to play with other musicians when I was like, in middle school or even freshman year in high school. I actually didn't start high school as a music major. I started as an engineering drafting major, if you can believe that, which is a terrible choice for me because I'm okay at drawing, but I'm terrible at math.
Okay.
And I quickly realized, this school has a music program. And so I decided to major in music. And this is right around the time that my interest in the contemporary music of the day and the music that kids in my neighborhood were listening to, namely rock and roll.
Right. And what year was this, George?
That was in 1980.
80. Got it.
And if you remember, John Bonham passed away in September of 1980, right. Which was like 2 weeks after I started school. Yeah. And the way I got into Zeppelin was really because of my dad as well. So my father had real eclectic tastes in music. And even though he was a dyed-in-the-wool jazz lover from the time he was a teenager, he was very open to all different kinds of music. I mean, we had like a lot of Latin music at home. My mother's Puerto Rican, so we just naturally had a lot of salsa music at home too, because that was her taste, and my dad loved it too. So Eddie Palmieri records, Fania records. There was a lot of Latin music. He also loved Eastern music, like flamenco, like Indian music, like Ravi Shankar, sitar music. He also loved flamenco quite a bit, Spanish guitar.
Sure.
And he took me to see Sabicas when I was pretty young, too. I was probably about 10 or 11 years old. So I was growing up with all these sounds, in the house. And I remember one time we went record shopping, and I was probably about 8 years old. And I used to do this a lot. We go on these record hunts, these excursions, And he was digging through the bins, and on the way home, I was looking at the records that he got, and I was fascinated by the covers because there was all these classic rock records: Jethro Tull, War Child, Aqualung, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon was in there, Houses of the Holy was in there, Led Zeppelin, I think 4, and Black Sabbath, Paranoid. I mean, you wouldn't think of the average jazz listener to be buying those kind of records,
right?
Much less, enjoying the music. But he did. He basically liked anything that sounded and felt good. Mm-hmm. And he was the one who said, "Listen to this drummer," about John Bonham. And I was pretty young then. Yeah. He said, "This guy's got a great feel and a great sound." So he was the one who kind of woke up my ear to that. And when I was about 11 years old, we went to see The Song Remains the Same.
In the movie theater.
In the movie theater,
yeah.
1977, wow. Fall of 77. And the film came out, I think, in 76.
Yeah.
So I was just mesmerized by that. Right. When I saw that, I was like, holy, And one tune in particular really stuck with me, and that was No Quarter. Mm-hmm. So when I got home from the movie, I remember going to look for the record, Houses of the Holy, because I knew the song was on there. And I found it and put it on, and I just played it over and over and over. And that's really when I got hooked on Zeppelin. So when I entered high school, I was a big Zeppelin fanatic, And so as far as like aspirations and dreams, at that point, I wasn't aspiring to be a jazz musician. I was thinking, I'm going to, I wasn't even thinking I'm going to be anything other than I'm into rock and roll and I like playing the drums.
Right.
And this is the direction I want to take. But at that point, I was totally into rock and roll music.
Certainly No Quarter, especially in The Song Remains the Same. It's a very jazzy kind of tune, right?
Yeah, it definitely has those elements. Yeah. Bonham, the sort of meta influence was always Bonham.
Right.
And I think for me, mainly because of the combination of sound, feel, and originality,
Right, and that power and that feel, that swing that he had, right? Because he was so influenced by Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa. Those were his guys, right?
Very much so, and Elvin Jones, too. I mean, if we start talking about Bonham's influences, there's a lot of them throughout the genres, but he certainly had a very great affinity for all the great black drummers, for black music, jazz music, rhythm and blues, soul. I mean, when you start thinking about like guys like Al Jackson Jr., Bernard Purdie, Earl Palmer, who's a legend of New Orleans session work. And all of those guys have something in common. They grew, well, of course they groove incredibly hard and set the bar really for it, but they all have that swing kind of sensibility. So there's an interesting kind of lineage. My dad heard that and felt it. And then I heard it and felt it because I was growing up hearing great jazz music. I was like, hey, wait, here's a rock drummer who really actually kind of swings. And the, Buddy Rich, Bonzo, I know he loved Buddy. But there are things about Bonham's playing that I hear that come from Sonny Payne, the great drummer with Count Basie's band, the way he set the fills, the sound of the drums. Yeah. I was very much obsessed with Bonham in particular, but with a few other drummers too, namely Pert, Ian Pace, Stuart Copeland, I loved a lot too. But the guys with good chops and a good feel, right? And so I used to transcribe, but not write. I don't like calling it transcribing. It's basically, for me, it's always been by ear. I used to meticulously learn the parts on those records and play along with them. But I didn't really make the connections at that time, at least in a very cursory way I did. But I didn't really know that much about the history of drumming or John Bonham's history to know where he came from. Okay. So after all these years of being a jazz musician and also getting a greater appreciation for soul and funk and R&B, which I wasn't as much into when I was in high school. I grew up in a neighborhood where, just be honest, people didn't listen to much soul and R&B. But when I got to high school, my horizons started to broaden, and there's diversity at my school. I went to a great school here in Chicago, and I started to get into different types of music. And then as an adult jazz musician, I started listening more and more to, people like James Brown, listen to Michael Jackson. I mean, just listening to great R&B and soul music. And I started looking at those drummers and like, oh, Bernard Purdie, wow, he could swing too. And he was influenced by so-and-so. And Al Jackson Jr. influenced so-and-so. And, David Garibaldi was checking these guys out. And Mike Clark loved Clyde Stubblefield. And, I didn't know all of that stuff in high school. But as an adult musician, I could put it all together and see that John Bonham, even though he was such an innovative drummer, and the first album really exemplifies how truly innovative and great he was, he didn't spring fully formed as that drummer. He came from somewhere. So I guess I'm taking a long roundabout way of saying this, but what I enjoy about doing this channel, even though it's just me in my basement banging out some Zeppelin covers and then occasionally talking about breaking them down, what I really enjoy about it is getting the feedback from other people about it. Mostly it's positive. There's always some naysayers, and that's okay. But mostly the response has been positive and enthusiastic. There's something about his drumming. He's one of those artists that when he hits, you hear and feel the bass drum or the groove. It does something for you. It satisfies like an emotional need. So I see that in the responses from these people, and they love it, and they're just like, man. And I'm not saying this at all in an egocentric way, because I would never consider myself anywhere near the talent, the raw talent and ability of John Bonham. But just the fact that I can play this stuff and it comes off sounding relatively okay, people are excited about it.
Absolutely.
And so it's made me feel like I have even more of an appreciation now for his drumming and his contribution to music, not just the drumming. He was not only a consummate drummer, he was a consummate musician.
One of the things we were talking about was, before the interview, there isn't enough footage of Bonzo playing, and that it would be great if there were more. Can you say more about that?
Well, I had hoped that with the 50th anniversary of the band's forming, that we would see some new, not just audio, but we would see some video that was previously held back in the can. But I just don't think there's that much of that. And again, it's just totally uninformed. But I wish that there was more interviews of Bonzo talking about his drumming and his influences. You know, Bonham died shortly after Modern Drummer was formed, I think. Bonham died in September of 80, and I think Modern Drummer came out maybe like around 78, 79, maybe even 80. But I remember they did a memorial to him, and I have that copy. But there weren't a lot of magazines back then that interviewed drummers, you know. And I may be wrong, but I think Modern Drummer was the first one that was solely devoted to drummers. So it would have been so great to see an extensive John Bonham interview talking about drumming, talking about his influences, talking about his favorites, talking about what he liked, what he didn't like, his tuning, why he chose the different shells, you know, of different fabrication. Like, of course, he had the old wood, you know, 3-ply wood shell drums early on, and then he had the Amber Vista Lights live. He tended to prefer the wood shells in the studio, although who knows, you know, who knows? He might have played. It doesn't sound to me like he played the Ambers in the studio.
Right.
It does sound to me like he played the steel in the studio, because I think on In Through the Outdoor, some of those songs sound like the steel drums. Yeah. But again, that's just complete conjecture. There's a picture of the Polar Studios. ABBA owned the studios where they recorded In Through the Outdoor, and you can see the stainless kit set up in one side, and then you see another kit. I think it's a green sparkle kit. You never know. I mean, in the studio, all bets are off. They're experimenting. That's right. Yeah. You know? That
would be cool, though, that if the rest of Zeppelin, you know, would confirm some of those things. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. Right? You know? Yeah, I mean, it would be great if they did like one of those classic albums type shows. Yes. Where they even did the second album or the fourth album. They take the master tapes out. They sit down with Eddie Kramer. Terry and I just like daydream about this stuff all the time, you know, and to no avail. I mean, I doubt that's ever going to happen.
Right. Who knows?
It is the 50th anniversary year, and I'm looking forward to some maybe new live releases. There's some rumors about on that, maybe something from the fall 71 Japan tour, How the East Was Won. Right. Some people are referring to it as, but so you know, a lot of his, I feel like a lot of his drumming, there are a lot of questions that could be definitively answered if there was a good, thorough interview of John.
You know, and the other thing I was thinking about the other day is, wouldn't it be great if, you know, all of these, the movie with The Song Remains the Same in Royal Albert Hall, they had a single camera on him for all that time, right? So they have all that footage. What's that?
It's one of the greatest frustrations.
Right.
Can I see the Bonham cam, please?
Right, exactly.
Or even what they call the God shot, the shot that has the whole band.
Right.
From center audience.
Right.
They have those shots. I mean, what happened to that camera? You know, I mean, I know some of the footage from Song Remains the Same. Those guys were partying real hard, the crew, and the story is that, you know, of course, Peter Grant and Jimmy got pretty upset with them, and they were fired, and then another crew was brought in to finish the film. So there's a lot of gaps in the footage, but there's still a lot of footage. Why can't they just like put together an alternate cut, or as like an extra DVD, a bonus DVD or 2 or 3 or 10 of alternate footage? Yeah, I mean, seriously, you know, there's enough. Zeppelin is so hugely popular that even the esoteric nature of the drum parts is going to appeal to hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, no question.
I mean, there's a market. There's definitely a market for it, especially in the drum community.
Right.
If they came out with a DVD that's like alternate, angles or alternate performances of John Bonham
Yes.
on The Song Remains the Same, on another night or something, guys would be buying that up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can you imagine from the camera angle of behind him and a view of his bass drum and his foot? That would be insane. That would break the internet. Yeah.
Yeah. And Moby Dick, as fun as it is to see the fantasy sequence,
right.
Boy, I would love to just see the whole damn solo.
Right, exactly.
Because once I've seen him walking a cow and drinking a beer once, right. I'm kind of good with that, I've kind of seen it. But I never get tired, or it would never get old seeing him working out on the snare drum, playing all that rudimental stuff.
Yeah. The next time you meet Jimmy Page and the rest of Led Zeppelin, can you ask him to release all this stuff? Because you met these guys, right?
Yeah, I did. And I didn't think about it that night, but yeah, I wish that I had said something about that.
Yeah.
Well, that was a dream come true. That was another surreal moment. Yeah. But, I wish I had said something about it, although I'm sure I probably would have gotten the same answer that most people get when he's asked in interviews and stuff. He's very, they're cryptic.
Yeah.
Well, Plant really isn't. Plant is pretty much, he just says what he puts it out there. And although I don't think he makes many of the decisions related to the archive or to their body of work. That's Jimmy. Maybe there isn't that much more left. Maybe the last reissue campaign put out most of the outtakes. That's possible. But I think that there's probably a lot of live material that they could work with and clean up with a nice little expensive audio program and get it sounding good. A lot of bands do that. A lot of bands put out archival stuff, and it's not recorded on multi-track, but it still sounds really good, and the fans are hungry for it.
Oh, very hungry, right?
Starving for it. As a matter of fact, that kind of leads me to want to talk about something. There's something I wanted to bring up before I forget. Given the fact that it's the 50th year, and it seems like it's a good opportunity for the band to, I want to say capitalize, because that implies, just a financial thing, but just to revisit and to celebrate the legacy of the band and their impact on music. I'm noticing that there's a wide range of ages now of interest in Led Zeppelin. There's a lot of younger people, teenagers. I have a 17-year-old son, and I'm seeing a lot of guys who are his peers walking around with Zeppelin T-shirts. 1977 tour, and I'm thinking, wow, really? Okay. Well, that's classic, right? It's something that's classic, and it's also, it's so great, and so many people identify with it across age barriers and cultural barriers, that this is a really great time, I think, to celebrate that. So that's why I'd hoped that there would be something a little bit more momentous.
And did you just do a cover version of that live Bring It On Home? Did I see you put a cover version?
No, I did a cover of How Many More Times live from Royal Albert Hall, which was kind of mammoth because there's a lot to that.
Yes.
And it's a medley. Yeah. They go through a bunch of different tunes. It was a lot to remember.
Right.
And I tried to do it as accurately to the recording as possible.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to mention about these covers is, so for example, Girl I Love, I'm going to do that one. I'm going to work on it.
Okay.
That one I want to nail. I want to do it as he played it. Okay. So there's certain ones I want to cover because I think they're deserving of a proper reiteration, let's say, Yeah. But sometimes when I'm doing like live versions of songs, I don't want to play them note for note according to that version. I like to play it in the style of that era. So let's say it's a 71 version of Thank You. Yeah. I might just play along with it to demonstrate his style of playing on a version from that tour, that particular tour at that particular time. Like with the 1973 tour, I just completed a few days ago the last song in the whole set list. Wow. So the set list starts with Rock and Roll, and there's about 10 or 12 tunes, culminating with Whole Lotta Love was their closer. Then they would often do one or two encores. So usually for encores, they would do Communication Breakdown or the ocean. Right. Now, I decided to do both because they would often do one or the other. So I did Communication Breakdown from Kezar Stadium 1973, and I used that recording. And then I decided to use the ocean because it's a good version. There's a soundboard recording. It's pretty clear. And the way I do my videos when I do covers is I record myself playing along to an iPod. I got my iPod behind me, and I just play the track. It's kind of old school, the old iPod Classic. And I listen and play along, but I only record the audio, obviously, of my drums. I don't simultaneously record the track. Then I put it in iMovie, and then I drag the audio in and align it according to the wave patterns.
Got it.
And that way I think it ends up sounding a little better with the two separate tracks.
Sure.
So that's what I've been doing with these videos. Now with the two encore versions that I did, I started out like I was just going to play along with them and, hang it all. I don't care if you're hearing snare fills that are different than mine or crashes going off when I'm not, But the more I listened to those versions, the more I wanted to replicate what he played. So I was like, I'm just going to play this version. So often, most of the time, I'm playing pretty much as close to what he played on the version as possible. With studio recordings, I'm playing as literal the same thing he played. Okay. I mean, of course, there's some things you can't know what he did, or which cymbal he crashed, or if it was his right hand sticking or left hand starting the sticking, or what. So again, it's a subject to interpretation.
That's right. The intro, the first few bars,
right?
Yeah, it's got me flummoxed because he does a bucket of fish in there, and then he does a couple of different things. So I'm looking forward.
He does his signature cymbal grab, the Buddy Rich kind of
that's right.
Over the arm.
Well, check it out on YouTube. It's called Bandology, and George's website is georgefludas.com. George, thank you so much for being on Musicians on the Record today.
Thank you, David. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you.